You're listening to Event Pack with Kendall Donaker. I have someone really amazing, Dr. Lea Lis. Her new book is out pretty soon called No Shame. It speaks about the conversations that we can have with our children about sex and living with no shame in regards to that, and just feeling more comfortable about having an open dialogue with your children. I've definitely read it, and it's an amazing and inspirational kind of tone, especially me being a single dad. And it really helps because, with my daughter, sometimes it's an uncomfortable topic. I really feel amazing about this episode. It's a long time coming. I had a podcaster's worst nightmare. We recorded a whole episode and the file got corrupted, so we had to do it again. But she's so amazing and gracious with her time, and I'm really excited for you guys to check out her book. Guys, please keep on supporting the podcast. Leave a review, and definitely give a rating if you can. Also, under the episode, there'll be a link to support the podcast. Any small donation really helps. It just goes to better quality audio, and just allows us to, just bring more exciting guests on the show. We're also creating, once again, a mental health app that will be, more details on that will come soon. And I'm excited about a lot of developments. This has been a great season for VentPack, and just getting to speak to a bunch of people and get different opinions in regards to mental health it has honestly been amazing. And the more I continue to do this, the more I really feel inspired to really keep on and expanding and making this a way better podcast than, in my opinion, it already is. So without further ado, I don't want to waste any more time. Let's get right into it. Let's vent. So, Dr. Lea Lis, I thank you so much for being on again. I had a podcaster's worst nightmare at first. We recorded a whole podcast and it got corrupted.
Awesome.
I know, and it was so awesome. So, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself and your book, which I pre-ordered, and we'll start from there.
All right, I just wrote a book called No Shame, and it's real talk with your kids about sex, self-confidence, and healthy relationships. And I'm real excited about it. I think being on with you is amazing because I know you're a parent and you live in Las Vegas, so hopefully you can get some people out west to purchase the book, which I'd be thrilled about. But also so we can help change the cultural conversation around parenting and sex and sexuality. So what questions do you have for me?
Well, so what kind of brought you to the topic? Like, what is it about sex and parenting that kind of brought you to kind of write a book about it?
Um, well, I started to work in the field of mental health at age 15 when I worked at an ADHD camp for ADHD kids. And then I did research on electroconvulsive therapy, even a research paper on using it in children, obviously for very extreme circumstances. At the age of 19, I started doing that research for children who had stopped eating, who had like what's called a catatonic depression, which is very, very, very rare. And then I was a neuroscience major at Dartmouth College, and it's been my calling. It's a lifelong passion working with children. So when the Me Too movement started and I started really working with kids, I decided that I wanted to write a book about parenting. So that's how I got where I am today.
Definitely. And you have kids yourself, yes?
Yeah, I have two kids, 7 and 10, two girls. Girl power. It's pretty awesome.
Absolutely. And as you know, I have a little girl myself. And so, how do you kind of approach that topic? I know you talk about it in your book, but how, what's kind of the stigma around parenting and speaking to their kids about sex? And, what problems do you feel like are faced with that by not speaking to your kids about it so openly?
Well, I feel like there's a lot of shame in the parenting world. in world in general about sex, people are really afraid to talk about it. And because they're afraid and they harbor so much of their own shame, they pass down a lot of intergenerational trauma instead of wisdom. And I really feel like if you embrace your sexuality and you really own your sexual story, you can pass down a lot of wisdom, and that's really what we want for our kids. So.
Definitely. And kind of speaking about, like kind of navigating through our children's lives in regards to sex, do you feel like speaking to them like so open? I know I asked you before, like, is it so much where you allow your children to have sex in your home at a certain age when they're ready, or is it more so them just talking to you about when they do have sex?
Well, it's I think it's your responsibility both to provide a safe place for your children to have sex when they are ready, whether that be in your home, most likely in your home, where else are they going to go? Which is your responsibility as a parent to ensure their safety. I mean, you always want to make sure they're safe. You work very hard to make sure they don't go over to someone's house that you don't know the parents, or that they're not going to an unsafe neighborhood. And if you don't ensure their safety, at all times, that's really, really important. So, I do think that's part A, and part B is like having really open discussions around contraceptive use, and also like just heartbreak. Like, what is it like to manage heartbreak? Because some kids can get so affected by it, they want to kill themselves or they're cutting themselves. Like, you have to be on top of that. You have to be their partner. So that's really important to me.
What are some of the consequences for not speaking to our kids about sex?
Well, there's a lot of studies that show that parents who are afraid to speak to their kids about sex are more likely to have children who get pregnant or get an STD, and that sexual education and also just collaboration parents is protective against, everything from sexual assault to pregnancy. So that's the reason.
Definitely. And when we're speaking about kind of like relationships and things of that nature, I think I asked you before, what's kind of your advice for engaging in a maybe sexual healthy relationship with somebody at a young age?
For helping your child, or for advice to a child, or what exactly, specifically, what do you mean?
Well, sure. Yeah. Advice to a child, or maybe just advice to someone younger, kind of afraid to kind of, maybe they didn't have their parents to help them explore their sexuality. And, what's your advice to someone who's kind of looking to go that route, but is kind of afraid to kind of step into that realm of sexual adventure, I guess I'd say.
Well, what's interesting is like there are a lot of kids who like are chomping at the bit to have sex. Like, but really in my practice, I see a lot of kids who are really afraid of having sex or having a girlfriend or boyfriend, or afraid of entering into their sexual initiation because they're socially awkward or they have social anxiety. And so there is a fair amount of those kids who, as parents, you need to help them, or as therapists or educators, learn the tools of like flirting and consent and how to negotiate consent. And like, you need to really push them to like make sure that they can have a healthy sex life. Let's say you have Asperger's disorder or another social disorder, and so for them it's like you really have to walk them through all those steps. Definitely. So you got half the kids who are chomping at the bit and need to be taught how to do it safely, and you have the other half who basically need your help in like learning how to flirt and learning how to be like
right,
get what they want eventually, which is a healthy sexual relationship. So
yeah, definitely. And by the way, I was born on Valentine's Day, so I'd say I'm pretty good at the art of flirting. But hey, I wanted to ask you, how do we teach consent? Because I think that's such a problem in especially America with people going into colleges, high school even. I really think we do not teach consent enough and what that means to especially our younger generation. So how do we teach that, and kind of what does consent really mean to you?
Great question. I love that. So consent is hot right now. I was actually just listening to a great podcast. Um, and she was talking about this idea of, consent being an oral thing is actually new. It's relatively new. And that was not always it was more negotiated through nonverbal communication, but now it's negotiated more orally, and through communication. And I think it starts as soon as kids can talk, or you really start to talk about boundaries. And that means like the bubble trick, like who's allowed to come into your bubble. Like you have a daughter who's 2, right? So it's already starting to talk about who's allowed to come into your daughter's bubble. Like, are people, allowed, what are the private areas? And you have to be very clear about what those areas are, which we can talk more about later. And then you have to say, like, consent means if you want to come into my bubble, you have to have my permission. And right. It's not about sexual consent in the beginning. It's about who gets to, change your diapers, or the doctor gets to see your private areas. But if some, kid in your class spanks your butt, that's not okay. Like, that doesn't feel good. I don't like that. I don't like that kind of touch. I don't like that kind of tickle. And I think it starts there and then it goes up. So, the podcast I was talking about was called Speak Sex with Eve. And she was talking about this idea of, negotiating consent being a Western, very recent phenomenon. And for me, it's like paramount to teach your little kids how to negotiate who gets to come into their body bubble, who gets consent to touch them, and goes all the way on up to high school, years, middle school years, where you then are already prepped to say, hey, can I kiss you? We're going to have a date, but it's going to be a waist up date. Like, I only want you to touch me from here up. I'm not ready for anything else. It's like, being very explicit about what you're giving consent for.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's really important because even with, me co-parenting with my child's mother, we really try to teach our daughter, like, hey, can I kiss you? Can I kiss you? And I remember one of the things that you told me that you didn't like is kind of like parents who will just grab and absorb their children and kiss them all over the place. And maybe they feel kind of uncomfortable by that. And yeah, I think it's about maybe picking up on certain cues with our children to see what they're okay with and what they're not okay with.
Yeah. And also, like, explaining to them about pleasure. It's like, what are the pleasures of sex in terms of even like when they're younger? Does it feel good when I brush your hair? Do you like to have your back scratched? And it's like, that's the start of touch as pleasure. And, then it moves on up through, actual sexual pleasure, and saying, do you like, and you're used to communicating that with your parents or your friends, right. It's gonna be that much easier to communicate that to your partner, saying, I like when I touch you, you touch me like this, but I don't like when you touch me like that. So right. You're already giving them language and tools from the start.
Definitely. And that's really important. And moving kind of towards that adult phase, do you find that kind of how you were taught as children kind of really affect how you are kind of sexually or communicatively as an adult? Because like you said, there can be some trauma in regards to kind of things that happen on a sexual level when you're younger. So how much does that affect a person's mental health when they become an adult?
Oh, it has a huge effect, especially sexual assault. And, and if you are not able to communicate your sexual boundaries effectively, it's much easier for you to get assaulted. And so that has a huge effect on your feelings about sex and sexuality. My teenagers who have been assaulted that I work with have lifelong problems with orgasm and sexual pleasure and trust, and it's very damaging. So learning upfront how to negotiate these kinds of things to keep your body safe is really important.
Definitely.